like, what do you mean I dance like Christian?
What's a Christian push-up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you do a Christian muscle up, please?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fossores Chapter House Podcast in conjunction with FAITH RX. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Liz Kirchmeier, the CEO of FAITH RX, and a good friend, Matt Farmer, who is a professor of dance at Hope College. So Matt, why don't you say hey and tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and what your interest is in the body and the spirituality of the body. You know, I'll just throw you a softball here to get started. You know?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Tim. And honestly, too, I just want to say thank you for inviting me on. I mean, I've said it in my emails. I'm just both honored and privileged and excited about this. So thanks for inviting me on. I can't wait to have a great conversation. Yeah, so like you said, I'm the chair of the dance department at Hope College. I am a professor of dance, still choreograph professionally on dance companies, colleges, things like that. I would say I'm a retired dancer in the sense that I no longer perform, on stage, but dance, you still perform in the sense of when you're in the studio creating.
I still play basketball. It just doesn't look like it used to. That's all. You know?
Yeah. And I think for me, the thing I'm excited about this podcast and what you're doing, and to your question, I was a professional dancer for 7 years, both in the United States and Europe. And before that, I have a major in acting. So I have a major in acting and a minor in dance, all things. And pretty quickly, I had to kind of reconcile my thoughts on the human body and my faith and spirituality, knowing that as I started to develop more and more of a taste for dance and recognizing probably around my junior year, I'd say, in college, saying, I think I want to pursue dance rather than acting. I really love this thing. I had to begin to tackle, what does this mean? Because suddenly now my body, is going to be the thing that A, makes me money, pays rent, B, is on display, whenever I'm performing, and C, is the thing in which I'm going to tune, if I can use that word in that manner, to the point that it can communicate with clarity and honesty and vulnerability. And so, I had to have a lot of sort of deep conversations with friends, myself, God, fill in the blank, my parents, about this career I was going to choose. That early, I would say, in my Christian faith, we'll probably get into this, but that, kind of the body was seen as this thing, obey the mind, not the body, those kind of things. And so, so I had to deal with that pretty quickly if I was gonna make this my career. So
yeah, well, we started talking about this because I think you reached out maybe a month or two ago about the Holy Alive journal articles that I was publishing, and I loved hearing you talk about what your body communicates because I think everybody's body is speaking all the time. The fact that I have tattoos communicates something. The fact that, I wear athleisure clothes communicates something. If I wear a tweed suit, that communicates something. The way I hug people communicates something. But you've done all that on purpose. Like I've sort of backed my way into all that intuitively and with some soft social skills. But you've thought intentionally about what your body is saying and what your body means in a way that I think is applicable to all people, not just people of faith. I mean, everybody's body's talking, and you at least taught yourself how to talk.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, a simple Google search, it will show you that it's something like 68.2 to, how statistics work, right? 68.2 to like 75.4% or something of all human communication across the globe, regardless of language, race, culture, fill in the blank, is body language. Yeah. Right. It's your point, Dave, is how we communicate with our body. And, as a part of being a professional dancer, like your job is, to your point, be hyper aware to not only train your body physically so it can do the physical executions that the choreographer wants you to do, right, but also that those physical actions have a communicative aspect to them. Yeah. Which sounds really funny, but when I teach composition, which is the practice of creating dance, or music or fill in the blank, but we call it dance composition. I use a really poignant example in my composition 2 class when I teach students, and I say, and I'll maybe do it in the camera because you guys can see. If I point at you like this, or if I point at you like this, or I point at you like this, or I point at you like this, I'm only pointing, but we as the receiver read so much into each of those.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Based on, based on our culture, based on our background, based on our gender and race, and our own history, so yeah, you as a dancer, and then honestly as a choreographer more so, right? So as a dancer, I spent so much time learning how to physically execute things that other choreographers wanted, but to your point, also physically execute what they wanted to communicate. Yeah. I would say the next step of that investigation was me becoming a choreographer. And now you have as a dancer, you're just told what to do, and then you might have some say, but you're going to do it. Right. Versus as a choreographer, you now have the entire human movement buffet at your disposal. And what action do you choose for this moment, for this step, for this, and then how do you weave those together in a singular dance piece that's anywhere from 8 to, I've choreographed pieces that were, an hour and a half long. In some words, it's very much like, writing a book, but with your body.
Yeah. So I have a million questions that I want to ask about that, but one of the things that Liz and I talk about a lot, particularly with CrossFit, but with a lot of athletes, is when they think about what their body communicates, they typically go, well, because my body's awesome, it communicates excellence, and I'm giving the glory to God with my shoulders, abs, and butt. And right, isn't that the thing? Almost every Christian spokesperson in athletics is like, "Hey, you gotta worship God with your body, like me." And you just sort of feel them squirting baby oil on their pecs, like they're gonna anoint themselves. What is this? And I think but the problem with that, of course, is I don't read anywhere in the Bible that the Apostle Paul had abs. He sounds like a little troll of a human being. So can a little gnarled, whipped backed, crippled troll with one eyebrow and a hunch, can he worship God with his body? Well, yeah. I mean, the fact that he keeps going after enduring all those crazy beatings and shipwrecks, that's communicating with your body. Not quitting is communicating. Having dignity, even if you don't have the body fat percentage that you want, that communicates something. Holding your head up high when you've had a horrible injury and your face doesn't look the way it used to, that communicates something. Those are powerful testimonies. And in fitness culture, we lose all that for the baby oil,
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the whole time that you were talking, I was listening, but I was also thinking,
he's a professor. He knows. He can tell if you're not listening.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to stare him in the eyes the whole time. The example you used with your finger and how the different ways that you displayed your hand and the way that you were pointing, I was so mind blown with that, because I also teach jujitsu, and we talk about being aware of your surroundings, and a big part of that is what is the body language that I'm displaying? Do I look like I'm having a rough day, like I care about myself, or my shoulders sloped? Do I look like I have friends? All of those things matter, because that could potentially warn off a predator or invite someone in. And as you were doing the pointing, all of these things are coming through my head, and we say we do that in English classes too, right? So we see a sentence and we emphasize different words but the same sentence, and you're like, man, it's totally saying something completely different. And so being able to do that with your entire body or just a fingertip, that's so amazing.
Yeah, you hit it on. Context is everything. To your point, to Dave, you're saying that if I'm a fit person, I'm going to walk around and I think I display confidence and maybe a little bit of aggression if I walk tall, shoulders back, chest out. Yeah. But Liz, to your point, in a certain context, that's going to warrant or invite confrontation, right? Yeah. Versus, the complete opposite of what you're trying to do. versus, it's funny you mentioned this. I was literally just watching a video. I don't know if it's jujitsu or aikido or something, but the guy was talking about like, listen, you don't really, when your hands are weapons, the goal is to not get into a fight, right? And so his whole thing was like, how do you maintain a posture of humility that tries to de-escalate the situation so that way you're not having to enter confrontation? And what you said is so strong, because I think that's exactly it. We don't realize how much of our body we are communicating on a second by second basis within the context that we find ourselves on a daily basis, or even a second by second basis. David, good example, like you said, I was just in Paris. How you carry yourself there is going to say a really big thing. I mean, talking to my students, I was like, listen, you can dress the part, you can talk the part, but depending on, like, you're still going to stand out.
They're going to know. They're going to know.
Yeah. And it's about our posture, and one thing I talked to them about is, I said, listen, Americans, even the way I'm sitting, you guys can't see me, but I'm sitting with my legs crossed, wide. I was like, Americans take up a lot of space. Why? Because we have a lot of space to take up, right? I mean, our country is vast. And so we're just used to taking up space because we have it, versus other countries, that have been around for centuries, and they're built in these small confined, they just don't take as much physical space sitting on the subway or eating at a restaurant. And so those simple things just communicate to people who you are, what you're about, and sometimes not in the right way. So yeah, Liz, I mean, you're spot on that just the body posture. Dave, to your point, the question of like, can someone praise God with their body who isn't fit? And I think for me, I think there's a lot of parallels between the athletic world and the dance world, because I always say that dancers have to be both athletes and models simultaneously.
Yeah.
Right. And the other hard part, I would say, for dancers is, unlike athletes, and this is not me bashing athletes, but like, we forgive athletes for dropping the pass, striking out, fill in the blank. We call it an error, right?
Yeah.
In dance, that's called your job.
That's great.
Like literally, like a great example is at the Paris Opera. This dancer just did this phenomenal solo, and man, he was killing it. And at the very end, he slipped, and the whole crowd, like in use, went, "Ooh,
yeah, you're 99.999% perfect, and you blew it at the end."
And you blew it, and the audience isn't going to forgive you.
Yeah.
Like that's the hard part about dance. And so I think in that case, the question is like, can you praise God with your body despite being the fittest person? And it kind of fits in the dance world. It's like, well, can you be a dancer if you're wheelchair bound? Right? Getting these big conversations of like, what does it mean to move? What does it mean to, or if I'm an amputee, can I dance? Or if I'm deaf, right? If I can't hear the music, can I dance? Right? And I think that the dance world has a lot of conversation. And actually there's full dance companies that are all wheelchair bound people. There's, believe it or not, there's tap dance companies that everybody's deaf. You're like, man, how do you tap dance if you can't hear what you're, so I agree with you 100%. I think, I think that we can praise God with the body simply because we've been given it. And I think where we falter, and I would say maybe in dance, and I don't want to speak, but maybe even, to your point, Dave, on the CrossFit world, is when we cross the threshold of using our bodies as our identity.
Yeah.
Versus our bodies as a thing that's been created for us as a way to not only praise God, but experience the world, the physical world that we're in.
Sort of an outside in versus an inside out kind of perspective. Yeah. As you were talking, I was really just struck by, one of the things that I've always, I've done a lot of traveling. I've been to, 50 or 60 different countries. And I started traveling internationally when I was really young, but primarily through youth group mission trips. And then far beyond that later, I'm always grateful to youth group mission trips because they really make you a world citizen. And give you an appreciation for red and yellow, black and white, and all the people that are made in God's image. But one of the things that you learn the more you travel internationally is your body creates an environment. Your body creates an atmosphere. It creates an ecosystem. It creates a space. And you can't control the larger circumstances that you're in, but you can control the atmosphere that you generate with your body. And I almost think of it like a scent diffuser, or maybe like an incense decanter. That there's maybe a 6 to 10 foot radius around every person. That's the space I'm creating. And in more or less dominant personalities, I'm sure if I'm standing next to Conor McGregor, he's the one who's deciding how the space feels. But I can still control what energy I'm bringing to the space, and if I come in with a sheepish cowering energy, he's going to gobble me up. If I come in with a lot of bravo and swagger, well, now we're going to have two rams going at it, and it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody. But the thing is you've got so much power. And when you travel, you oftentimes find yourselves in areas you didn't want to go to. You often find yourselves in situations that feel dangerous or tense. The metaphorical biker bar, the dark alley, the wrong side of the tracks, the place where everybody else has a different skin color than you, whatever. And how you maintain your posture and your poise by having a sense of self-possession is a witness and is a gift and is a testimony and is a kind of ambassadorship. And is an act of worship, because if you go into a place where you feel threatened and you act like a victim, it's like there's blood in the water for the sharks. So most of us, knowing that, overcompensate, and we go in with a ton of swagger and a chip on our shoulder. And so then what we're communicating is not worship and dignity as image bearers. What we're communicating then is a sort of childishness. So you have these two. You have the sort of the weakling prince, and then the childish tyrant that are really these lesser versions of who we are that are manifested so strongly in our bodies when we travel. And those same things are manifested in our bodies when we go to the gym. You go to a new CrossFit gym, you want to look cool. You go to a new powerlifting gym, you want to look tough. You go to Muscle Beach, you want to take your shirt off and feel like you fit in. But all of those things are our bodies talking, and all of those things are our bodies, telling a story not just about who we are, but about who we think other people are. Mm-hmm. And I contrast that kind of posture with like church. You go to church, and there's in a good church system, they're not always good, but in a good church, you get the old men who come and put their arms around you and tell you they love you. That's ministry of the body. You got the little old church ladies who come up with their little, grapevine hands that look like clusters of dates, and they hold on to you and they tell you that they love you and they're praying for you. That's ministry of the body. And I think, how can I show up in every space like those church people? How can I love people at the gym the way those old people at church love me? How can I love people on the wrong side of the tracks when I stumble into their bar, or when I stumble out of their bar? How do I love them like that? Because I'm in control of what my body communicates, regardless of how I'm feeling.
I think some of that too is having confidence in, like, you as a child of God, not confidence in you because of your physical body and what it looks like. I think that says a lot. Like, your body language in that regard says a lot. Like, I walk around confidently because I'm a child of God, not because I have a six-pack. I also don't have a six-pack, so that's part of it too.
Well, join the club.
Well, I think too, it's a lot like I think if I'm nervous about me, no matter what the reason is for my nervousness, I'm in trouble. If, however, I go into a room and immediately or into a space and immediately I'm going like, Lord, these are my fellows, my brothers and sisters. These are my step siblings. These are your children. How do I love them? And what does love look like right now? And I used to think that love looked always like excessive friendliness. I've since learned that that's just annoying for a lot of people. they feel less loved. But just coming in and going, what do they need? How do I serve? How can I love them? And sometimes that might mean, erecting boundaries and creating space and appropriate distance and all that, because some people can be predatory. But it's just a different frame. How do I love these people as right now, as opposed to how do I show up and be okay?
Yeah, and I think you said you guys are talking about it, and what's striking me again is this idea that, like, I'll call it body language, that our bodies are always speaking. And one of the things you hear is that, one of the many reasons to learn a foreign language is so you can just communicate better,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's one of the things I love about different languages, that there's so many words out there in different languages that to me encapsulate a moment or something so much better than the English version, right? I mean, one of the ones I always like to use is the German word Gestalt,
Yeah.
right? And it means so much more than like all of it. It's like the whole, but the whole essence that, and I'd have to spend a paragraph in English trying to like describe just the word Gestalt.
Yeah.
And for me, the body does the same thing. And I always think about like what a better world it would be that if everybody, yes, could speak, 5 languages or something, but if everybody also could speak 5 languages with their body,
Yeah.
to your point, I could walk into a space and I could code switch really quickly because I could read the context. And
Yeah.
not only could verbally I communicate with the people around me, but man, Dave, to your point, I could also show love, I could show grace, I could show vulnerability and honesty physically in the way that the person I'm with or people I'm with understand it. And I think it's, easy to put things in a monolith, but like just because you're in the United States doesn't mean the body language is the same. I mean, you travel, anywhere across the
Yeah.
US and it's like, man, body language changes. It's fluid, and to your point, if I'm in New York, I flip my body language when I'm in New York, versus if I'm, that's right, versus if I'm, somewhere in the Southeast, versus if I'm, out west, like in like farm ranch country, I know exactly how to switch my posture, switch my body language, and and it's not to be disingenuous. It's actually the opposite.
No, it's a way of showing respect and honor. You're enculturating, yeah. And
Yeah, to say I love you enough that I'm going to change. I'm going to change my presentation versus expect you to change for me.
Yeah, right. I don't need you to be from Michigan when I'm in Detroit or when I'm in New York. Yeah, I've often found it's really easy to be funny, make friends, and have fun in other cultures when you don't speak the language if you use your body. Because we all share that awkwardness of like, okay, I'm sort of stuck with you. We can't talk. Now what are we going to do? And you being a bit of a ham is just a really simple way to build bridges, and it breaks a lot of the tension. And there's a bunch of bad ways to do that, but there's also a lot of really good ways to do that too that make everybody have a good time. And it makes me, all this stuff makes me think about worship. I was a worship leader for a long time. I've trained a lot of worship leaders, and I wish that we would expand our vocabulary of bodily worship. Because by and large, when you worship in church, you stand there, or you stand there with your hands folded, or you raise your hands in one of 4 or 5 different postures. And then you get some of the worship dancing, which is sort of strangely Jewish looking. You might get the bum out, hands up worship dance. That's some sort of a Christian wobble that makes me want to neither be Christian nor to ever see anyone wobble, which is strange. How can you wreck the wobble? But church ladies have been doing it for years. Yeah. You don't need to tell me about purity culture. You just need to show me that awful wobble, and I'll be celibate forever. But I would love to see more experimentation and more yearning, more exploration with the body during worship. And not necessarily in particular gestures. I mean, of course, but the Orthodox and the Catholic tradition have plenty of gestures, but just people being with their body, through their body, in their body, because of their body, in the presence of God.
Yeah.
I think one really cool thing that I think maybe off the top of my head, I think is kind of unique to dancers, because I can't think of anyone in jiu-jitsu and CrossFit that like want their body to feel vulnerable.
Oh,
right?
sure.
Or want to come across that way. So like when you talk about that, I'm like, yeah, that's like a whole another side that we just don't see very often. We don't express, like, we're excited to show how strong and how brave and, you know, all of that are, you know, outside of even abs. But if we're talking about like what our body is representing, we want to be strong and brave and confident. But being vulnerable is such a great gift to share with someone too.
Well, big strong dad with a little girl breaks every heart. You know, like that tenderness is so provocative, so powerful. Yeah.
Well, and I personally think there's no greater sign of a person of confidence than when they can be vulnerable. Like, I mean, you're right, Liz. Like, that's the thing, is that I mean, because I was an athlete all through high school. Like, I was a track runner, did hurdles, high jump, like, still love, you know, working out, obviously. But you're right. There's this sense of like, I don't know if it's the competition, whatever, but like, I can't be vulnerable. And that's one of the beautiful things I think that dance taught me. Is what's interesting about that is you'll hear dance audiences, or anybody who enjoys dance, who watches it, they'll say things like, man, that performer was great, but I just didn't believe them. Right. Or man, they could execute, but there was something about their performance that just wasn't striking me in the right chord. And in my opinion, what they're always talking about is that person wasn't vulnerable on stage, right? That, like, ultimately, from a performer's aspect, ultimately the goal is to give yourself up to the moment so that the audience can have an experience, not you, right? And I give a lot of credit to my high school theater teacher, of all people, that he always said, listen, the bow at the end of the performance is not for you. It's you thanking the audience for spending money on spending time with you.
Yeah, that's great.
So don't take the bow as your time to gloat. You're actually thanking the audience for their hard-earned money, for taking time out of their day to spend with you and trusting you with like this time. And I've held that, all through my career, but I think also, to your point, like, it's obviously infiltrated my life. That the ability to be vulnerable. And I think, Liz, I'd love to hear, I don't know, within, the various martial arts styles, I have to think that there's some sort of practice that, like, maybe it's not vulnerability, but maybe humbleness or something like that is wrapped somehow in there, right? Because it's like, whether you're approaching an equally, I don't know. I mean, I listen to enough philosophy and read it.
That's okay. You're not going to mess it up.
Yeah. But that's this idea, like, don't over, if it were to come to martial art, right? Like, don't over, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, don't think of your skills so high that this match is going to be easy.
Yeah, so I think there is a little bit of that, where and I say this to people all the time, like, even though, I've been training jiu-jitsu for 15 years and I feel like I'm at a pretty decent skill level, but, whether it's in competition or self-defense, I'm never willingly going to put myself in a position where I could put unnecessary danger onto myself, right? So that takes a little bit of understanding that, like, I might be okay at what I do, but I would be quite ignorant to think that nobody else in this whole world could be a little bit better than me. So there is that. And then I think also, like, in training, we have to be vulnerable, not only for protection of ourselves, but for protection of our partners. But when we're on stage or when we're competing, I feel like vulnerability means loss. In jiu-jitsu, in most martial arts. And I would almost argue that it feels kind of the same way for CrossFit. Like, when you're vulnerable, it's because, we're expressing sadness or defeat, not necessarily because we're expressing a story or a performance at that point,
Yeah. And I think maybe that's an interesting point. In performance arts, particularly dance, vulnerability doesn't actually have to do with weakness. It has to do with openness.
Yeah.
Right. Openness to receive and give, because that's the thing, is you're in conversation with an audience. And so you have to, at all times, while yes, you have to execute the steps, you're always feeling the audience out. can I hold this position a little bit longer because they're with me, or do I need to move on because they're not with me?
Yeah.
And it'd be an interesting thing, I wonder, to like take that into the competitive world, right? Because in some regards, it's not a vulnerability of like, a false humility or a weakness, but it's like it's an openness to give and react. Yeah. Which I wonder, like, in jujitsu or any martial art form, if that would have some sort of positive effect, right? Versus like trying to mentally always analyze the situation, that like you're open in the present moment.
I think about it as like the idea of committing, or the sort of the full send message, because you think about an athlete. Athletes in a CrossFit workout are typically going at about 80 or 85% of their capacity. They could push it to 90 or 95% capacity, but if they do that, they're gonna gasp, they're gonna pass out, they're gonna maybe throw up, they might not have anything next for the next event, So they're always holding something in reserve. That happens a lot with preachers. That happens a lot with worship leaders. As we have a greater range of emotionality, of expression, of tone, of volume, but we don't want to blow it. We don't want to be overexposed or step out too far. And in CrossFit, it's because you're afraid I'm going to be embarrassed because of the limits of my physicality. In ministry, you think I'm going to be embarrassed because I go out on a ledge and it's going to be goofy. But it's a sense of shame and a fear of people's reactions and of our own reactions in both cases. And I think vulnerability is really going, no, man, save nothing for tomorrow. Save nothing for the next life. Save nothing for the next WOD. That's what it really means, is to just go balls to the wall, full steel, And of course, there's times where you shouldn't do that, and times where you have to keep something in reserve. But you ought to know when the times exist that you should go all the way. And what I see in preachers and what I see in worship leaders is they never go all the way. They stop themselves, and using a musical analogy, in the dynamic range from pianissimo to fortissimo, and everything in between, most preachers and most worship leaders perform consistently at a mezzo forte. They have no lows and no highs. They just have middle, and they're the beige of church. And I think that's what happens in a lot of athletes too, is they're just like, I want to go through and not embarrass myself and get a 0.5% better this year and maybe lose 3 pounds so that I can eat an extra piece of pizza. And there's no commitment to it. And I think that's the same spirit that you're describing when you talk about vulnerability in dance.
I think it's the same thing as when we're training our muscles, right? Like there has to be a great timing. Otherwise, like I could do a set of 10, rest 3 minutes, do a set of 10, rest 3 minutes, do a set of 10 of whatever weight. And like, I'm not going to progress, right? But if I do a set of 10, wait 2 minutes,
sure,
and then do a set of 10 and wait 2 minutes. So it's like understanding. I think you made a point of that, Dave, is saying like, there's understanding the timing, when to push forward, when to hold back. It's the same thing as when we're training our physical body.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point too, right? I mean, like you guys said it well, both, that like you're afraid of how you look, right? And here's a good example. I was just in Paris, and I didn't get a pass to a gym, so I just went to an outdoor gym. And I'll tell you what, man, these guys at this gym were doing feats like I was like, whoa, like just like on monkey bars.
Was it all calisthenics and stuff? Like, yeah.
Oh yeah. And my first thought was like, what am I doing here?
Why is it all those outdoor gyms are like that? Like the Miami outdoor gyms are like, why are all the beautiful people here?
Totally. And I mean, they're like, some guy, I literally walked in, some guy doing the flag on a vertical pole, but like to that point, my first thought was like, what am I doing here? This is stupid. I'm going to look like an idiot. But then my second thought was, hold on a second. Like, again, if I can be vulnerable and just come in to do what I need to do. Yeah. Like, let me just focus on what I need to do, not in an exclusive mindset, but from an inclusive mindset. And the moment I made that mental switch, the beautiful things now, sure, I'm sure there were a couple of people there who might have been looking at me and laughing at me, but like there were a number of people who came up and, in their best broken English possible said, oh, it's great to have you here. Welcome, And it was one of those moments I thought, man, yeah, like had I mean, because there was a hot sec. I looked and I thought about going back to do yoga in my hotel room.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm gonna do booty boot camp on Taibo or something.
Yeah, but like and again, what it did is for me, again, it's just this idea, like it's not that vulnerability is a weakness. It's being willing to acknowledge the moment and then lean into the moment
Yeah.
and be like, okay, there might be some naysayers, but man, if I have to worry about naysayers the rest of my life, then I should have quit life a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I think is so sad about the church and Christians in general is the way we think of the body and the way we think of sexuality and the way we think of movement. And I was just thinking about how intense your experiences with the church must have been, because here you're using your body to demonstrate beauty in the highest ideal of honor and worship to God. But I would guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that you take a fair amount of backlash from Christians for dancing, because dancing is sexy or foxy or strippery or gay or something, and you're sitting there going like, why are you criticizing me, and why are you taking something that's beautiful and making it ugly, and in the process you're sort of inferring that all sex is ugly and tawdry anyway. Now, I don't know if that's any of your experience, but when I've worked with dancers in the past, that seems like an overwhelming avalanche of their experience.
Oh, absolutely. I would say, to the point that, confessedly, I would say I left organized religion for a while, but never God.
Yeah.
Because, to your point, Dave, whether I was accused of being gay, or you're right, it's sinful, or my favorite was like, it's like, oh, so you do Christian dance. And I'm always like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, well, you like, you dance only for a Christian dance company, or you only do dance that's, to a Bible verse. And I was like, no, I'm a professional dancer. Like like, and you could just see people's heads explode.
Yeah.
At the end of this podcast, I want you to dance to a Bible verse.
Bible, baby, Bible, baby, Bible, baby, Bible, baby.
Yeah, and this idea too that like, and I danced in Europe for several summers, and Europeans just have a different sense of understanding of beauty too. And I think that's the other thing too, is that like, people be like, oh, but like you do ballet, like that's okay, that because that's beautiful. And I was like, well, actually I do modern and contemporary. It's like, oh, that's that scary weird, like, and yeah, absolutely. And I'm sad to say it's still something I face today, in the sense of like, when you talk to Christians and you try to not all, but certain sects, and you try to explain, no, I don't do liturgical dance. Nope, that's not what I do. Oh, well, you obviously, you dance for, I could name, 12 different, Christian dance companies. I'm like, nope, never danced for them, never worked for them, and it's like this idea. And I think it happens in music. I mean, and in some regards, I had a really good friend who said this, and she's in theater, and she said, the thing I find so frustrating is we don't have Christian gas stations.
Right.
Right? We don't have.
Well, Buc-ee's, I suppose, sort of counts,
Yeah, they're selling testaments, right? That's how they. But and there's this weird thing, and I think you hit it the nail on the head, Dave. It's because particularly the performing arts and dance, of all of them, is the art of the body, and for so long, particularly in sort of westernized Christianity, the body has been removed from a part of the understanding of God. There was a really good podcast, I can't remember who I was listening to, but he said, this guy said something, I was like, whoa, that's so profound. He said, I feel like the modern American Christian church has more in common with Plato than with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And specifically talking about, right, like the body, like the understanding of the body. Yeah. And I think it's an interesting thing. And I mean, I don't know if CrossFit people, have the same thing, but it's like, if you're a CrossFit person and a Christian, are people like, oh, so you work out to like Christian music, right? That's all you do, right? Or like, when you compete, it's okay if you compete as long as you have like WWJD on your shirt.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. What would Jesus deadlift?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. WWJL.
Do you remember those commercials that went out a while ago, and they were really like pro girls, and because they would, say things like, "Oh, you run like a girl, you do girl push-ups." And so they made those commercials or those little reels. Well, they probably weren't called reels back then, but they made these little commercials that were like, the producer you can hear asking, like, can you show me what a girl running looks like? Like, how do you run like a girl? Or how do you do a girl push-up? Like, all these things. And she's just like, oh, running? Like, like, and so it's kind of the same concept. Like, what do you mean I dance like a Christian?
What's a Christian? What's a Christian push-up?
Yeah. Can you do a Christian muscle up, please?
And I would say like two liberating things for me in that journey. Number one was honestly just attending a Black Southern Baptist church one time.
Oh, sure.
And like that tradition, understanding of the body, is so vastly different than sort of like white evangelical Protestantism. And I just remember like just like being like, oh, there is a section of Christianity that like gets it. And to your point, Dave, they're not waving flags, like it's just like the experience of the body is a part of understanding God in worship, to a point that I think, might make some people uncomfortable, but to me, I was like, this is so liberating that I have the freedom to, now, tap my feet, but, jump up and down if I want, because that's, that's the experience I'm feeling, in this moment. The other experience, which ironically didn't even come from a Christian, but Martha Graham has a really great saying that for some reason just struck a chord with me. And she said, "Where a dancer stands, there is sacred ground."
Oh, that's great.
And I think that's right, because I think to your point, this idea of like, oh, well, you're a Christian and you're a dancer, so you must do X, Y, and Z. And my answer has always been no, because I'm a child of God. Wherever I'm dancing, that is sacred ground. Whenever I am using the skills that I have worked hard and the talent that God has given me to my fullest, that's sacred.
Right. My body is a roving temple. Wherever I go, that place is sacred because that place is where God's going to be worshipped.
Yeah. And, and it doesn't have to be necessarily that I'm doing praise dance, as it were, but because you're right, because my body is a temple and because it was created by God. Like, God knew you from, before you were born. And so it's like that, for some reason, that was a liberation for me to go, oh, just being present, physically present, is sacrament.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. Well, and I think one thing about this is, evangelical theology is really thin. We tend to focus on the resurrection of Jesus at the exclusion of almost everything else, or the final judgment and who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. But we really like the resurrection. Catholics typically really like the crucifixion. They're sort of a passion-driven theology. The Orthodox Church really likes the incarnation. They really put the emphasis on God becoming flesh. But evangelicals, we like the part where Jesus isn't dead anymore. Consequently, we tend to skip over all the rest of the Christian story to just hurry up and get to the miracle, which means that in our art, we don't have any patience or tolerance for things that are sad, lonesome, depressed, angry, frustrated, violent, because we go, no, that's not Christian. You're like, what? Yeah. So Job's not Christian? Esther's not Christian? Moses wasn't Christian? Genesis isn't Christian? So when Jesus' family is being, hunted by the Roman or by Herod and they got to run to Egypt, that wasn't Christian? Jesus isn't a Christian? Like, you're telling me that large parts of Jesus' own story, including the parts where he was murdered, including the parts where he was betrayed, including the parts where he was lynched and he had to do his magical vanishing act, and none of the book of Acts is Christian? Because it's not all resurrection. And so because we have this sort of, it's like we're hitting one key on the piano over and over and over again. And if your Christian message isn't, he's alive, then it's not Christian. And I go, there's a whole lot of other stuff in the book if you read it. Instead of just, the few chapters at the end of John where he's, walking around again. And I think that shows up in people's critiques and in their fear of dance, or in their fear of painting, or in their fear of film, or in their fear of music, as they go, this sounds dark, and darkness is bad. You're like, well, I don't know. God created the world out of darkness. When the earth was formless and void, that's where it began. It didn't begin with "Let there be light." It began before that.
Yeah. Well, and to the body perspective, even not the dance perspective, right? That, I kept hearing as a choreographer now, I always hear like, your pieces don't have a lot of redemptive quality to them. There's no, and that's to your point, Dave. That's that hidden like, where's the time where Jesus comes back? Like,
Yeah, it's like you gotta throw out your arms in a crucifixion pose in every scene. Okay. Oh, good. All right, we got it now.
Check.
it ends happy. So, and I think, speaking to the body, again to maybe the listening audience, this idea, I think it can filter in then right into like workout, like, oh, I'm not seeing the results I want. Oh, I don't have the six pack I want. Oh, I don't, and this idea, which I think historically I can understand where it came from, but like that we're not okay with our body as it is at first, right? Like there's this, right? It's exactly what you just said, Dave, right? Like, oh, we got to get to the end. We got to get to the end story. And it's like, well, how about don't get me wrong. Like, obviously, like all of us who are trying to like, obviously myself as a dancer, like I'm always stretching more, trying to, develop the skills I need. But like learning the process of just being okay with your body as it is, I think is such a part of what should be any Christian's journey. Like, be okay with the body as it is. Do you want it to look differently? Sure, if you want to, but like be okay with what you came out with first. Be okay with the story. Be okay with the whole story.
Yeah. If you're going to plant a garden in your backyard or do some landscaping, your garden is not going to be fully mature or grown inside of the next few years. Your fruit trees aren't going to produce fruit. Your goofy bonsai tree is going to be a stunted little toe of a plant for a long time. I mean, you got to be patient. You don't burn the garden down in the first year because it's not yet the Garden of Eden. You got to grow it, and your body's the same way. Especially if you're older. I mean, if you're in your 30s or 40s and you've already kind of missed that perfect body window from Instagram, it's going to take you more than a year to look the way you want. It's going to take a hot minute, and it's going to be a lifestyle change that perpetuates into the future far more than it's going to be a weight loss challenge. And people do the weight loss challenge and they're not sexy at the end of it, and so then they go back and have a triple cheeseburger and kind of give it up, and you go like we're not selling sex. We're inviting people to experience God in their body. And that's a way radically different orientation towards health and physical fitness and overall well-being. And I actually like the term well-being more than health and fitness or health and wellness because you want people to be, you want them to be good, like to feel good, to be good, and they don't have to be super fit. They don't have to be triathletes. They don't have to be CrossFitters. They don't have to be ninjas. They just got to be good with who they are. And there's sure some maybe physical optimization that happens in that, but if you put the emphasis on how amazing they are as an athlete, you miss out on how healthy they are as a person.
Well, we see that a lot in CrossFitters, like, a lot of them, especially young ones, are taking time off and away because they recognize that this is not creating a healthy.
Well, sure, some of the
health,
games athletes right now, absolutely,
like Adams just came back, and man, she's like a completely different person because she stepped away. Like her body looks completely different. She like has womanly muscles now. She's so strong, but her spirit when she was there, like, she was just overflowing with joy and happiness because she was able to enjoy the experience instead of just, struggling so hard to achieve, the win. She wasn't enjoying it anymore, is how she put it.
Yeah, it goes to the whole thing, like, why are you doing it? And that's when people ask me, like, well, what does it mean to be a Christian and a dancer? And I'm like, well, the first question you have to ask is, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Or to be a Christian artist, right? Like, I don't have to speak about joy and to be a Christian artist. I can speak it, to your point, Dave. I can speak about the tough time, and I can leave it there. I can leave about, I mean, how I don't, Dave, you'll probably know, but how many books in Psalms are actually about joy, and how many are actually about like, man, life kind of sucks right now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always wrap up at the end of those ones and be like, oh, but it's good, like, but yeah, like why are you doing it? And I think, from a body perspective, it does it you have to change your mindset. Because if the reason you're doing a body transformation, whether it's in dance or CrossFit or fill in the blank, if you're doing it for external affirmation, man, you're going to burn out faster than a forest fire in the middle of July. Like it just, you know what I mean? Like it's going to go away because you're looking for external validation from something that we keep hitting it, but like your internal validation comes from the fact that you're a child of God. Hard stop, end of story. And if that's where I think a lot of people should start, uh, as they look towards, that's why I like what you said, Dave, like wellness, because trust me, I've had a lot of really grumpy, angry people who are physically like the perfect specimen, but they just, aren't happy like internally.
Yeah. 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 And you want people, to be well in all directions, like First John says, prosper even as your soul prospers, or like, I think it was Teresa of Avila, or it might be, Catherine of Siena, one of those great saints, but she said, all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. Like, that's what you want. Even J.K. Rowling, when she gave her commencement to the Harvard graduating class of whatever it was, 2011 or something, she published her commencement address under the title "Very Good Lives." And she said, that's the goal for humans. It's just to live very good lives. You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be the best. You just want to have very good lives. I like Jesus' version better, where he said, I've come that you might have life and life more abundant. But that's the idea, is you want to have this great life. You want it to be awesome. And it can be unawesome when you focus too much on physical fitness. It can be unawesome when you focus too much on personal satisfaction and trivial pursuits. It can be unawesome in a bajillion ways. But let's highlight the ways in which we want to grow and cultivate our humanity, our love for one another, our worship and honor and glorification of God, and that'll lead us in the way we ought to go.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap up here, but last question for you. If you could wave a magic wand and sort of heal any conception in the church or any ideology in the church about the body, what would you do?
People who've been on your podcast probably have said the same thing. So at the risk of sounding redundant with other people, I would say I'd wave the magic wand and get rid of the idea that the body is evil. Just this idea that, like, and I don't know, to your point, Dave, I grew up in the purity culture era, of the United States. So, I have my own history with that. But this idea that, like, that the body itself, because it's physical, is evil.
Yeah.
I think that's led to a lot of harm in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that so quickly do natural, normal things, the changes that happen to your body when you're a teenager, either male or female, the things that happen that over which you have no control. It's crazy how fast those become ensorcelled in shame. You're like, well, why? Like, God made your body to do these things. You have no control over them. Why do we live in a world in which you are shamed for what is happening non-voluntarily to the body of a 10-year-old or 12-year-old or 13-year-old? Like, that's crazy. And we all go through that, and we're all
and it's led to a denial of us understanding our body. To your point, Dave, whether it's the involuntary developments of our body, but also it's just led to us ignoring it completely in the church. That that as a source of both inspiration, of God, for God, but also just that, like, it's the vehicle with which we live this life. And so if my body is inherently evil, then does that mean my life is inherently evil? Do I spend the rest of my life asking God for forgiveness for being alive? Like, I mean, that's kind of an extreme version, but I think it's gone that way in some areas.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's so much self-loathing and hatred and shame and heaviness in the church because we're mad at people for being people. How dare you, people? And you're like, well, take it up with the designer, man. I'm the garment. He's the seamstress. So, like,
nobody asked me, when I was born.
Yeah. That's right. Well, thank you, dude. Thanks for a great conversation, and I love you tons, man. And if I can ever do anything for you or for Kristen, for anybody you love, I'm in. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, and I'll definitely be reaching out. Like I said, I'd love for you to speak to my students, like I said, this coming fall for part of my class, which is kind of a senior capstone course. So about this same subject.
Yeah, I'll be asking them as many questions as they'll be asking me, because I love the perspective that you bring. I feel like I have so much to learn from you and from just your whole world. It's fascinating. So I love it. Yeah. All right. Love you, dude.